I am currently obsessed with the television show Andor. What I mean by obsessed is that I've watched it through a full 3 times in the last 2 months. And when I haven't been watching it, I've been listening to podcasts discussing the individual episodes and stories. At this point, I'm not really getting new information from watching or listening, but I find myself wanting to watch it and devour it again and again and again. For those of you who don't know, Andor is the prequel to the movie Rogue One, which in turn is effectively a prequel to the original Star Wars movie. Given my love of Star Wars, it probably wasn't surprising that I would get hooked on this latest offering. And if you haven't watched it, watch it now. You can even leave the service to go watch it immediately. I think that at this point, it is okay to give spoilers related to the original Star Wars movie from 1977. If you haven't seen it yet, shame on you. Effectively, it is the story of the Rebel Alliance fighting against the evil Empire and ultimately seeking to destroy their superweapon, the Death Star. Spoilers, thanks to Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, and a handful of others, they succeed in their mission. To reach the stirring conclusion, the movie begins with stolen plans for the Death Star. Rogue One effectively tells the story of how they obtained the plans, and Andor tells the background story of the hero, Cassian, who helped steal the plans and share them with the rebels. To my mind, Andor is an amazing commentary on our society, and there are lots of ways that it is relevant for sermon material, for Judaism, and for life in general. But today, the element I want to focus on is the way that it tells the story of how individual actions and individual people themselves ultimately led to the destruction of the Death Star. Yes, we can still celebrate the big battles and all the action that happened, but Andor adds a whole cast of people whose actions and stories ultimately lead to the moments that the original film celebrates. So what does this have to do with Tisha B'Av? On Saturday evening into Sunday, we will mark the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. Tisha B'Av is a fast day where we remember the destruction of the 2 temples in Jerusalem. It is that saddest day on our calendar when we lament those moments of loss and destruction, era-defining moments that changed the course of Jewish history and, by extension, the world. When studying what actually happened with both the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians and the second temple by the Romans, there are geopolitical reasons why the Israelite community was attacked and why their temple was destroyed. Neither event happened in isolation, but rather they happened in the context of wider events in the ancient Near East. Viewed through a strictly historical lens, the Israelites were a small part of a bigger story, with no agency to avert this tragedy. They were simply victims of more powerful players, and ultimately they had little ability to control their destiny. The rabbis were unsatisfied with a historical account of what happened and why the temples were destroyed. And so in relation to the destruction of the second temple, they told us a story in which they claimed that the temple was destroyed simply because of 2 individuals and sinat chinam, senseless hatred. While I have shared this story before, here is a quick refresher. There was a man who was friendly with an individual known as Kamsa, but his enemy was Bar Kamsa. He decided to have a feast, and so he told his servant to bring Kamsa to join. But the servant mistakenly brought Bar Kamsa. When the host saw Bar Kamsa seated at his party, he told him that he was unwelcome and should get up and leave. But Bar Kamsa was embarrassed and asked to stay as he was already eating, and he even offered to pay for his share. The host refused. So Bar Kamsa offered to pay for half the feast if he could stay. Again, the host refused. And so he offered to pay for the entire feast. But the host refused again and threw him out of the party. Bar Kamsa reflected on the fact that the rabbis did nothing to prevent his embarrassment and allowed the slander to happen. And so he decided to seek his revenge. He went to the Caesar and told him that the Jews were rebelling against him, and he could prove it by seeing if they sacrificed an animal on his behalf. Caesar did as he suggested, but Bar Kamsa cut the face of the animal on its way to the rabbi so that it would no longer be kosher to offer at the temple. The rabbis debated what to do, and even considered murdering Bar Kamsa to remove the evidence, but ultimately they followed their laws and refused to offer the sacrifice. And because of this, Caesar saw that they were rebels and destroyed the temple. When drawing the lessons from this story, we often focus on the fact that the cause of the temple's destruction was senseless hatred, and offer teachings suggesting the need to reject hatred and pursue love in order that we may flourish. And while this is an important lesson, I think there is a secondary lesson that the rabbis were trying to teach. In offering this explanation for why the temple was destroyed, they were claiming agency over events. They ignored the fact that at the time the Roman Empire could pretty much do whatever it wanted and destroyed many cities and sacred places, instead telling a story in which they, the Israelites, were responsible. And their story is not focused on the temple's destruction. Instead, it focused on individual people and the significance of their actions to have far-reaching consequences. It is a reminder of the power of individuals and our actions to make a difference in our world. In the Tisha B'Av story, actions have tragic consequences. In contrast, in Andor, the actions ultimately lead to the destruction of the empire and bring positive change to the galaxy. As we prepare to mark the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, the rabbis decided that in the face of a day of ultimate suffering and sadness, rather than only lamenting what was lost, they would remind us of the power of our actions and how even a single individual can make a huge difference. Tisha B'Av is still a day of mourning and lamentation where we reflect on what has been lost, but it is also a day that reminds us of our power. In the face of suffering, we can still affect change and make a difference in our world. And while there is a focus on the destruction of the temples, it is also a day that recognizes the fact that our world is not perfect, and that there was suffering then, and it persists to this day. But in the face of evil and persecution, even in the face of the Roman Empire, we still have the power to effect change, to make a difference, and to impact our own destiny. To that end, this year, Temple Shir Tikva is joining with the Religious Action Center of Massachusetts, Truah, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, JALSA, the Jewish Alliance for Law and Social Action, together with over 20 other communities and Jewish organizations to participate in an action to support our state offering sanctuary to those who need it, and to call on our elected officials to protect immigrants and build a commonwealth that upholds the dignity and safety of all people. This resonates on Tisha B'Av because the destruction of both temples led to the displacement of the Israelite community. We were the immigrants in the aftermath of those events, and we have a responsibility today. And it resonates on Tisha B'Av because it is a reminder of the fact that we have the power to effect change, that our actions matter, and that we can make a difference. If you want to find out more about this gathering, if you're here in person, please do speak to Bob Costa at the conclusion of our services. And if you're watching via the live stream, check the website or our Facebook page and various other materials. Tisha B'Av is a day of mourning, but it is also a call to action and a reminder that even in the face of the most powerful forces, we still have power. We still have agency, and we can still make a difference. We can affect the change that we want to see in this world. And through Andor, we are reminded that in the face of challenges and suffering, we can be amongst the people who nurture hope, who nurture tikva for a better future against the Roman Empire, against the evil empire, against whatever galactic forces we may confront. But together, we can do it. Shabbat Shalom.